My brother's son terrorized my niece while he laughed. When I rescued her, they tried to kill me. They told everyone Sophia fell down the stairs, but I'll never forget her terrified whisper that night. Logan pushed me, and Daddy just stood there laughing. That's when I knew I had to get her out, no matter the cost. I pulled into Daniel's driveway, my hands still gripping the steering wheel after I cut the engine. The perfect suburban dream house stood before me. Immaculate landscaping, warm golden light spilling from the windows, not a blade of grass out of place. My brother had always been meticulous. Tonight was Logan's 12th birthday, and I was already 15 minutes late. Something felt off the moment I stepped out of my car, the silence. A birthday party for a 12-year-old boy should be bursting with noise, laughter, shouting, the chaos of children. Instead, the house stood eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. My mother's voice echoed in my head as I walked toward the front door. You always make everything dramatic, Clara. Not every child needs to be coddled like you think. I could almost feel her disapproving stare. Daniel is a wonderful father. Don't disrupt his family. I took a deep breath, reminding myself I wasn't here to argue. I was here for Sophia. My 9-year-old niece needed me, even if no one else in this family would admit it. The front door was unlocked. Typical Daniel, believing his prestigious neighborhood was impenetrable to anything unpleasant. I let myself in, calling out a hello that seemed to dissolve into the expensive furnishings. No response. No sign of little Sophia racing to greet me as she usually did. Then I heard it. From upstairs, the faintest sound of muffled crying. Not the dramatic sobs of a child's tantrum, but something restrained, something hidden, something that made my heart rate quicken. I knew that sound. I'd heard Sophia cry before, but this was different. This was pain being swallowed, contained, as if even in her distress, she knew she shouldn't be heard. My footsteps felt heavy as I climbed the stairs, each one carrying me toward that sound that grew clearer with every step. The hallway stretched before me, and at the end, Sophia's door stood slightly ajar. A gentle draft moved through the corridor, making the door creak almost imperceptibly. Every instinct told me not to look. That seeing would make it real. That seeing would force me to act. But I couldn't turn away. Not again. I pushed the door open, and the sight before me stole my breath. Sophia knelt on the plush carpet, her small fingers trembling as they gathered scraps of fabric and stuffing. Her favorite stuffed bunny, the one I'd given her last Christmas, lay in pieces around her. White cotton clung to her fingertips, and silent tears traced paths down her cheeks, dripping onto the destroyed toy. My heart felt like it was being crushed. "Sophia?" I whispered. She flinched at my voice, looking up with wild, frightened eyes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then her voice came, fragile as splintering glass. "He ripped it apart." I didn't need to ask who he was. My eyes darted to the hallway, half expecting to see Logan standing there with that smug smile I'd grown to dread. But the corridor was empty. He didn't need to be present. His cruelty filled the room like a poisonous gas. I remembered all the times I'd witnessed his accidents around Sophia, the way he'd shoved her down in front of Daniel, who merely laughed and told his son to take it easy next time. How Lauren, his stepmother, never once looked at Sophia when these things happened. Looking at my niece methodically gathering the remains of her treasured toy, I realized with sickening clarity, Sophia was used to this. She had accepted that no one would protect her. No one but me. I gently took Sophia's hand, feeling her tiny fingers curl around mine like a lifeline. "Let's go downstairs," I said softly. "We're going to talk about this." She hesitated, eyes wide with fear, but followed me anyway. Each step down the staircase felt like we were descending into some elaborate trap. I expected confrontation. I expected tension. What I didn't expect was complete indifference. The living room was picture perfect, just like everything else in Daniel's world. My brother stood by the fireplace, champagne glass in hand, laughing with Lauren about something trivial. Logan sat on the couch, arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips as he watched us enter. No one even acknowledged Sophia's tear-stained face or the way she tried to make herself smaller beside me, as if she could disappear into the expensive hardwood floor. I felt something crack inside me, This wasn't just neglect. It was a carefully orchestrated power dynamic with a 9-year-old girl at the bottom. "Why did you do that?" I asked Logan directly, my voice cutting through the ambient chatter. The room didn't exactly fall silent, but heads turned. Logan shrugged, his smile widening with satisfaction. "It's just a stupid toy," he said, looking to his father for approval. The rage built inside me like a pressure cooker. I'd stayed quiet for too long, watching this family from the sidelines, making excuses for Daniel's parenting, for Lauren's coldness, for Logan's escalating cruelty. "It wasn't yours to destroy," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Before I could continue, Daniel stepped forward, his expression a perfect blend of annoyance and condescension. "Clara, don't make a scene over something so trivial. It's Logan's birthday." I stared at my brother in disbelief. "Trivial? You think this is trivial?" I gestured toward Sophia, who was now staring at the floor. "Your son destroyed the one thing your daughter treasures, and you think that's trivial?" Daniel took a slow sip of his champagne, eyes never leaving mine. "Sophia needs to learn to be tougher. The world isn't going to coddle her." Lauren nodded in agreement, her manicured nails tightening around her own glass. "Children need to learn that possessions aren't important." "Is that what you teach Logan?" I asked, gesturing toward the pile of expensive presents stacked on the dining room table. Daniel's face hardened. "That's different." "How?" "Because he's a boy? Because he's your biological child? Because he reminds you of yourself?" Each question felt like pulling the pin from a grenade. I looked down at Logan's birthday gift in my hands, the limited edition gaming system he'd been asking for, the one I'd spent an entire paycheck on, trying to be the perfect aunt to both children. Something inside me shifted. This wasn't about a stuffed bunny anymore. This was about years of watching Sophia fade away in this house, her spirit dimming a little more each time I visited. I met Logan's eyes, holding his gaze as I spoke with quiet resolve. "You don't deserve this." Then I walked calmly to the kitchen trash can and dropped the wrapped package inside. The silence that followed was absolute. Logan's face went from shocked to furious in seconds. Lauren gasped dramatically. But it was Daniel who exploded, slamming his glass down so hard I thought it might shatter. "Get out of my house," he growled. "Now." I didn't argue. There was nothing left to say that would change anything tonight. Instead, I knelt beside Sophia, brushing her hair back from her face. "I won't let them hurt you anymore," I whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. "I promise." As I walked out the front door into the cool evening air, I knew the real battle was just beginning. Daniel would try to keep Sophia from me now. He would tell our mother I was unstable, dramatic, interfering. But for the first time in years, I didn't care what anyone thought. I'd seen the truth tonight, and I couldn't unsee it. And I would do whatever it took to protect that little girl, even if it meant tearing this perfect family facade apart piece by piece. My phone rang the next morning while I was still staring at my bedroom ceiling, replaying last night's confrontation in my head. I nearly ignored it, assuming it would be my mother calling to berate me. When I saw Daniel's name on the screen, my stomach twisted into knots. I answered, bracing myself for the explosion. "Clara." His voice was unnervingly calm. "I've been thinking about what happened." I waited, saying nothing. "If you're so concerned about Sophia," he continued, his tone measured and cold, "why don't you take her for a few days? Let her cool off." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. In all the years since Sophia was born, Daniel had never willingly let her out of his sight. Not for sleepovers, not for weekend trips with our parents. He always had an excuse. Homework, routines, doctor's appointments. "You want me to take Sophia?" I repeated, certain I'd misheard. "Just for a while. It might be good for her to get some space from Logan. They've been clashing lately." My mind raced. This was too easy. Daniel never compromised, especially not after being challenged. Every instinct I had screamed that this was wrong, that there was something else happening. "I'll pick her up this afternoon," I said, before he could change his mind. When I arrived at Daniel's house 3 hours later, Lauren answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's ready," Lauren said, stepping aside. "We didn't pack much. She doesn't have anything important anyway." The casual cruelty of her words made my skin crawl. Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching a worn backpack that looked nearly empty. She descended slowly, her eyes darting between Lauren and me. I noticed she wasn't carrying any toys, no favorite clothes, nothing but that sad little backpack. "Do you have everything you need, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sophia nodded silently, her eyes wide and watchful. As we walked to the car, a horrifying question lodged in my mind. Did they ever truly consider her their daughter? Sophia paused before getting into my car, looking back at the house. It wasn't a glance of attachment or regret. It was pure fear, as if she expected something to come bursting through the door after her. That first evening at my apartment, Sophia seemed to relax fractionally. Her shoulders dropped a little. She even smiled when I ordered pizza and let her pick a movie. But I couldn't miss how she flinched at loud noises. The neighbor's door slamming, a car honking outside, even the microwave beep. I didn't push her to talk. Instead, I focused on making her feel safe. I gave her the guest room but left both our doors open. I bought her a new teddy bear with a bow that matched her favorite color. I let her set the pace. It was nearly midnight when I heard it, soft crying coming from the living room. I found Sophia curled up on the couch, clutching the new teddy bear to her chest, tears streaming down her face. I sat beside her, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel crowded. "Bad dream?" I asked gently. She stared at the wall for so long I thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Not a dream. It was real." My blood ran cold. "What was real, sweetheart?" Her fingers tightened around the teddy bear. "Everyone said I fell, but I didn't fall. I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck." Sophia was referring to an incident from last year. She had fallen down the stairs and broken her arm. Daniel had called it a typical childhood accident. "What do you mean, you didn't fall?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Sophia looked down at her hands, her voice becoming even smaller. "Logan pushed me." I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my expression neutral. "Can you tell me what happened?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on something far away. "We were racing. I was winning. Logan got mad." Her words came out mechanical, rehearsed. He said, "You don't get to beat me." Then he pushed. Hard. The room seemed to grow colder as she continued. "I screamed when I fell. My arm hurt so bad." A single tear slid down her cheek. "Dad was there. He saw. He just laughed, said I needed to be tougher." My heart pounded against my ribs. "And Lauren?" She looked away. She always looks away. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. I wanted to pull Sophia into my arms, promise her that everything would be okay, but the truth stuck in my throat. How could Daniel do this? How could he watch his son hurt his daughter and laugh? And more importantly, what else was he hiding? I thought about how easily he'd let Sophia come with me. After years of control, why now? What had changed? "Sophia," I said carefully, "has Logan hurt you other times?" "Times I don't know about?" Her eyes met mine, wide and haunted. The truth was written there before she even nodded. "Dad says it makes me stronger." Her voice broke. "But I don't feel stronger. I feel scared all the time." In that moment, I knew I couldn't send her back. Not tomorrow, not ever. Whatever game Daniel was playing by letting her come with me, I wasn't going to play by his rules anymore. "Listen to me," I said, taking her small hands in mine. "What Logan did, what your dad allowed, that's wrong. It's not your fault. And it doesn't make you stronger. It just makes them cruel." Sophia's breath caught. No one had ever validated her experience before. "You're safe now," I promised, though I wasn't entirely sure how I would keep that promise. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." As Sophia finally drifted to sleep on the couch, I sat watching her, my mind racing with questions. What was Daniel's endgame? Why let Sophia go now after years of keeping her under his thumb? The answer felt just beyond my grasp, shadowy and sinister. But one thing was crystal clear. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Sleep eluded me that night. While Sophia rested peacefully for perhaps the first time in years, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, a cold cup of coffee by my side. Something about Daniel's sudden willingness to let Sophia go didn't add up. My brother never surrendered control without a reason. I began searching through old news articles about Daniel's community, his company, anything that might give me insight. For hours, I found nothing unusual: charity events, business announcements, school functions, until a small headline caught my eye. Middle school incident leaves student hospitalized. The article was brief, carefully worded. A 12-year-old boy had been seriously injured during a school science fair. The reporter mentioned that another student had been in proximity when the incident occurred, but no names were given. It wasn't until the final paragraph that Logan's name appeared, stating only that he had witnessed the unfortunate accident. I dug deeper, finding a follow-up article that mentioned the injured boy had transferred schools. The incident was quickly forgotten, dismissed as an accident. Then I found a comment on a local parents' forum, quickly deleted but preserved in a screenshot. Everyone knows the Henderson boy pushed him. His father covered it all up. My blood ran cold. Logan had been hurting other children long before Sophia. And Daniel hadn't just protected his son. He'd enabled him, making excuses, cleaning up messes, teaching Logan that there would never be consequences for his actions. I rubbed my eyes, feeling sick. This wasn't just about a broken toy or a shove down the stairs. Daniel was raising a predator, methodically shielding him from any accountability. With shaking hands, I called my parents. It was late, but I knew they'd answer. They always did for Daniel. "Clara?" My mother's voice was groggy with sleep. "What's wrong? Is it Sophia?" "She's fine," I said quickly. "She's asleep. But Mom, I need to tell you something important about Daniel, about what's been happening in that house." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and heavy. I told her everything. Sophia's broken arm, Logan's history of violence, Daniel's calculated indifference. The words poured out of me, desperate and urgent. When I finished, my mother's voice came back cold and distant. "Daniel is an excellent father. Stop making up stories, Clara." Making up, my voice caught in my throat. "Mom," he watched his daughter lying on the floor with a broken arm and laughed. He told her to be tougher. The silence stretched between us. Then, my father's voice, quiet and chilling. "Why do you always have to dig up things that don't need to be dug up, Clara?" The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "What did you say?" "You heard me," he replied. "Some things are better left alone." I hung up, my heart hammering against my ribs. They knew, they'd always known, and they'd chosen to look away, just like Lauren, just like everyone else in Sophia's life. Everyone except me. The next morning, I called Sophia's school while she was still asleep. Her teacher, Ms. Reynolds, hesitated when I mentioned concerns about Sophia's home life, then slowly began to talk. "I've noticed things," she admitted, bruises that didn't match her explanations. Days when she couldn't focus because she was so tired. I filed reports with the principal, but nothing ever came of them. I wrote everything down, then called the neighbors on Daniel Street, claiming to be conducting a community survey. One elderly woman, Mrs. Keller, mentioned offhandedly that she once saw that poor little girl locked outside at night, but Daniel had explained it away as a punishment for misbehavior. By noon, I had a list of incidents, each small on its own, but together forming a devastating pattern. The hospital records showed Sophia had been treated for various injuries 5 times in 3 years. The attending physician noted that Daniel and Lauren rarely stayed with her during treatment. I organized everything chronologically, made copies, and called my brother. "We need to talk," I said when he answered. "All of us. Today." He agreed too quickly, his voice unnervingly pleasant. I knew then that he was planning something, but it didn't matter. I had what I needed. Daniel and Lauren were already seated when I arrived at the cafe I'd chosen. Public enough to prevent a scene, private enough for this conversation. Logan, thankfully, was nowhere to be seen. I placed the thick folder on the table and slid it toward them. "What's this?" Daniel asked, not opening it. "Everything," I replied. "Every hospital visit, every teacher's concern, every neighbor's observation, police reports that mysteriously disappeared, therapy sessions that were abruptly canceled when Sophia started to talk." Lauren's face drained of color. Daniel remained stone-faced, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his coffee cup. "You have two choices," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Either sign over custody of Sophia to me right now, or I take all of this to Child Protective Services, the police, and every news outlet in the state." Lauren's eyes darted to Daniel, who sat perfectly still, his eyes burning into mine. "You wouldn't dare," he said finally. I leaned forward. "Try me. I'll destroy you," he growled, mask finally slipping to reveal the monster beneath. "I'll tell everyone about your breakdown in college. Your failed relationships, everything." I smiled, feeling oddly calm. "Go ahead. Unlike you, I don't have anything to hide." Lauren's hand trembled as she reached for the document I'd placed before them. A carefully worded agreement relinquishing their parental rights and granting me temporary guardianship until formal adoption could be arranged. "Daniel," she whispered, "maybe we should—" "Shut up," he snapped, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing his options, his reputation against his daughter. It was no contest. Sophia had never mattered to him. "Sign it," I said, sliding a pen toward him. Lauren signed first, her signature a shaky scrawl. Daniel stared at the paper for a long moment, then at me. "You think this is over?" he asked, voice low and dangerous. "No," I replied honestly, "but it's a start." He signed with a vicious slash of the pen, then stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "You'll regret this," he promised before storming out. Lauren lingered, her eyes fixed on the table. "I should have done something," she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. Then she was gone, hurrying after Daniel. I gathered the signed papers with trembling hands. I had won this battle. Sophia was safe, at least legally, but as I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the chill that ran down my spine. This wasn't over. Daniel would retaliate. He would try to take Sophia back, or worse. The war was just beginning, and I needed to be ready. But for now, for tonight, I could go home and tell Sophia that she never had to go back to that house again. And for the moment, that was enough. For 2 weeks, I lived in a strange state of suspended fear. Sophia was temporarily staying with our cousin Emily, a kindergarten teacher with a warm heart and a spare bedroom. The courts had granted me emergency custody, and Sophia seemed to be slowly healing. She even smiled sometimes. But something felt wrong. Daniel's surrender had been too clean, too easy. My brother was a man who controlled every aspect of his life with precision. He wouldn't simply walk away from something, or someone. He considered his property. I kept expecting the other shoe to drop. A custody appeal, a smear campaign, something. But there was nothing. Just silence. "Maybe he really is done with the whole thing," my friend Megan suggested over coffee. "Maybe he's relieved to not have the responsibility." I shook my head. "You don't know Daniel. This isn't over." That night, driving home from work, I first noticed the car. A black sedan with tinted windows, keeping a consistent 3 car lengths behind me. When I took a deliberate wrong turn, it followed. When I pulled into a gas station, it cruised past slowly, then disappeared. The next day, I came home to find my bedroom window cracked open, just an inch, but I was certain I'd closed and locked it before leaving. Nothing was missing, nothing disturbed. Just that open window, like a message. "I can get to you whenever I want." Then came the knocking, exactly at 3 a.m. for 3 nights in a row. Loud, insistent knocking that jolted me from sleep. Each time I peered through the peephole, the hallway was empty. I didn't call the police. What would I say? My estranged brother might be stalking me? I had no proof, and Daniel had too many friends in the department. On the 7th day, a plain white envelope was slipped under my door. No name, no address. Inside was a small note card with Daniel's distinctive angular handwriting. "You think you've won. You don't even understand the game yet, Clara." I crumpled the note, my hands shaking with fury and fear. This was classic Daniel, the mind games, the psychological torture. He wanted me scared, wanted me jumping at shadows. That night, I double-checked every lock, placed a chair under my doorknob, and kept my phone and a kitchen knife on my nightstand. I fell into a fitful sleep sometime after midnight. The sound that woke me wasn't loud, just the soft click of something metallic against metal. My eyes flew open, Instantly alert, heart hammering in my chest. The digital clock read 2:17 a.m. Someone was in my apartment. I could hear careful footsteps moving through the living room. The floorboard near the kitchen creaked. The one I always avoided late at night when making tea. I slid my hand toward the knife, gripping the handle so tightly my knuckles turned white. The footsteps paused, then continued, slow and deliberate, coming toward my bedroom. The doorknob turned slowly, testing against the chair I'd wedged beneath it. It held for a moment. Then I heard a soft grunt of frustration. Suddenly, the door shoved inward with enough force to send the chair skittering across the floor. A tall figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. I didn't need to see his face to know who it was. "Hello, Clara," Daniel said, his voice eerily calm. I gripped the knife tighter. "Get out of my home, Daniel." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. "Your home? Nothing is yours. Not this apartment. Not your peace of mind, and certainly not my daughter." He stepped into the room, and the hallway light caught his face. His eyes were wild, unfocused. I'd never seen my controlled, calculating brother look so unhinged. "You've ruined everything," he snarled, lunging forward suddenly. I rolled sideways off the bed just as he crashed into it. The knife was still in my hand, but Daniel was already recovering, spinning toward me. "You took Sophia from me," he shouted, grabbing my arm and yanking me toward him. "You destroyed my family." "You never cared about Sophia," I screamed back, struggling against his grip. "You let Logan hurt her. You hurt her." Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of pure hatred that made me realize this wasn't just anger. This was madness. I broke free of his grasp and stumbled backward. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out something that gleamed in the dim light. A knife of his own, longer than mine. We circled each other, the bed between us. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice suddenly calm again. I tried to be reasonable. I tried to handle this quietly. He lunged across the bed, slashing wildly. I felt a searing pain as the blade caught my shoulder, but adrenaline kept me moving. I swung my own knife defensively, feeling it connect with something solid. Daniel grunted in pain, momentarily stunned. I didn't hesitate. I drove my knife forward with all my strength. The blade sank into his abdomen. His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with fury. He staggered backward, clutching the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. "You bitch," he gasped, falling to his knees. Sirens wailed in the distance. A neighbor must have heard the commotion. Daniel's eyes darted to the door, then back to me. Despite everything, despite the blood spreading across his shirt, he smiled. That smile chilled me more than anything else. The police burst through my front door moments later, guns drawn. They found me sitting on the floor, my hands shaking, covered in blood. Both his and mine. Daniel was slumped against the wall, still conscious, still smiling that terrible smile. As the paramedics worked to stabilize him, he beckoned me closer. Against all better judgment, I leaned in to hear his whispered words. "I'm not acting alone." My blood turned to ice. An officer pulled me away as they lifted Daniel onto a stretcher, but those 4 words echoed in my mind. Not acting alone. Not acting alone. There was only one person it could be. Lauren, the woman who had stood by and watched Sophia suffer. The woman who had signed away her stepdaughter without a second thought. The woman who now knew exactly where Sophia was staying. The hospital kept Daniel in custody while he recovered from his wound. The police investigation moved quickly. Breaking and entering, attempted murder, the evidence was clear. But something else emerged during their search of Daniel's home that chilled me to the bone. Lauren was nowhere to be found. She probably ran when she realized her husband was going to prison, the detective suggested. I knew better. Lauren hadn't run away. She was executing the next phase of whatever twisted plan they had concocted. My phone rang the next morning, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct told me I needed to hear this. "Hello, Clara." The voice was soft, almost friendly. "I'm sorry about what Daniel did to you." My grip tightened on the phone. "Lauren." "Yes." A pause. "You've made a terrible mistake. You know, Her calm tone was more terrifying than any rage. There was no emotion, no desperation, just cold, calculated purpose. "Where are you?" I demanded. "That's not important," she replied. "What matters is that you understand something. Daniel was never the one you should have feared." The call ended, leaving me frozen in place. All this time I'd seen Lauren as Daniel's shadow, the passive enabler who looked away while he tormented Sophia. But what if I'd misread everything? What if Lauren wasn't just following Daniel's lead? What if she was directing it? I immediately called Emily, warning her to stay vigilant, to keep Sophia close. I couldn't explain the dread that had settled in my stomach, but I knew we weren't safe. 3 days passed without incident. I began to wonder if Lauren had simply fled the state, if her call had been nothing but empty threats. Then, returning from a quick trip to the grocery store, I noticed my apartment door slightly ajar. I set the bags down silently in the hallway and pulled out the gun I'd purchased after Daniel's attack. The police had advised against it, but they couldn't be with me 24/7. Pushing the door open slowly, I stepped inside, gun raised. The apartment was eerily quiet, but I sensed a presence, that unmistakable feeling of eyes watching me. Lauren stood by my living room window, wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in the fading evening light. She turned to face me, smiling as if we were old friends meeting for coffee. "Hello again, Clara." I kept the gun trained on her. "Why are you here, Lauren?" Her smile never wavered. "Did you really think I would just let you live peacefully after taking everything from me?" "Everything?" I almost laughed. "You signed Sophia away without hesitation. You never cared about her." Something flickered across Lauren's face, a momentary crack in her perfect composure. "You understand nothing." She took a step toward me, and I tightened my finger on the trigger. "Stop right there." Lauren paused, head tilting slightly. "You won't shoot me, Clara. You're not a killer." "I defended myself against Daniel. I'll do the same with you." She smiled again, taking another step. "Daniel was weak, emotional. I tried to guide him, but in the end, he couldn't control himself." As she advanced toward me, I realized with sudden clarity, Lauren had been the architect all along. Daniel's rage, Logan's cruelty, she had cultivated it all, standing in the shadows while they acted out her design. "Don't move," I warned one last time. She ignored me, her smile widening. "Do you think this is the end, Clara?" I fired. The bullet hit her chest. Lauren stumbled backward, her expression more surprised than pained. For a moment, she remained standing, that eerie smile still fixed on her face. "You think this is the final act?" she whispered, blood beginning to stain the white fabric of her dress. Then she collapsed, her body crumpling to the floor like a marionette whose strings had been cut. In the end, the investigation ruled it self-defense. Daniel was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Sophia found a permanent home with Emily and her husband, who formally adopted her. Logan was placed in a juvenile facility specializing in behavioral disorders. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal. I moved to a new apartment, started therapy, even began dating again. Sophia visited often, her smile growing more genuine with each passing month. Then, 6 months after Lauren's death, a letter arrived. Plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sentence written in an unfamiliar hand. "The game isn't over yet, Clara." I stood by my window, looking out at the gathering darkness. Someone was still out there. Someone connected to Daniel and Lauren. Someone who knew about Sophia. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The monster under the bed loses its power once you've stared it in the face. I folded the note and placed it in a drawer. Let them come. I would be ready.